Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today for the Wildfire Resilience Grant webinar. We'll be discussing the recently released RFP. And I am Coastal Conservancy. I am a Central Coast Conservancy project manager. On this webinar, we also have Lily Allen, North Coast project manager. We also have Tom Gainsbury, Central Coast project manager. Mary Small, Deputy Executive Officer, and Jen Fields, our Sea Grant Fellow, who is going to be doing our Zoom moderation and Q&A. So just a couple of housekeeping things that we'll go over with Jen, and then we'll jump into a brief overview of our agency and the funding itself, the pre-application process and the selection process. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions. We anticipate at least half the webinar will be dedicated to questions. So you'll have lots of opportunities to ask your questions. So take it away, Jen.
So just to go over some logistics, we will not be using the raise hand function. Sorry. We are not using the raise hand function during this webinar. We will be using the Q&A function for all your questions. You can also see everyone's questions, so you can upvote questions that you would really want us to answer during the session. And then we will have the live transcript enabled during this, so feel free to use that as well. And pass it back off. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Next slide, please. So just to orient you all to our agency, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, the State Coastal Conservancy is one of 10 conservancies that are government state agencies. We are a mighty but small agency. There's about 70 of us, and our jurisdiction is listed here in green, which spans all the way from Del Norte County down to San Diego County. This area is only about a third of the state, but it covers 75% of the population. So quite a bit of the population lives within this area. Our mission is to protect the coast, but also provide public equitable access. Next slide, please. So the Wildfire Resiliency Program started off with 2020's awarding 35 early action grants totaling 11.4 million. Over 400 acres have been treated to reduce fire risk. These grants, like the ones we'll be talking about, are focused on improvement of natural lands to reduce the risk of catastrophic fire in areas where people live. Next slide, please. So let's talk about our priorities for this funding. We have 6 main priorities: addressing high-risk areas for wildfire, ready to implement, hit the ground running, implementing the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Action Plan, providing significant public benefits to disadvantaged or underserved communities, leading to long-term resiliency or more sustainable benefits. And of course, the stronger the proposal, the more of these you'll address. So while we don't anticipate you to address all of these necessarily, your proposal will be stronger if you do address these 6, as well as the more specific priorities for the 2 funding pots we have. Something I do want to point out that CEQA compliance is required for funding from us. So in your pre-application project description, we do ask that you state your CEQA status. Your answers to this question can be any one of the following: you're exempt, you've completed CEQA documentation, your project is covered by the Cal Vegetation Treatment Programmatic EIR, or you may not know if CEQA applies. So please just state that, and that'll help us to better understand where your project is, and we can have further discussions with you if we need to. So the funding, we have two pots of money, as I mentioned previously, $10 million for projects that are implementation projects within our whole jurisdiction area, which once again is indicated in green here. 5 million of that must be spent in the Bay Area, the 9 counties. And we also have another 7 million for capacity building projects, which are indicated with that thatched area. If your project falls in the thatched area and it includes capacity building as well as implementation, you could dip into both pots of money. So specific priorities for the implementation projects include the project is identified in the Community Wildlife Protection Plan or another Wildlife Resilience Prevention Plan, and it or benefits public or protected lands. Examples of these projects are all listed here, and these are also listed in the RFP. They can range from fuel breaks and other vegetation thinning, use of beneficial fire to reduce risk, prescribed grazing, removal of fire risk, invasive plants, chipping, and this is not an all-inclusive list. So if you have a project that is not listed here, but you think it would qualify as an implementation project, you can reach out to us and we can have a discussion with you whether it would fall under this funding. Again, just to clarify, this funding is the $10 million that the project needs to be located in our jurisdiction, which is the green area indicated on the map. Next slide, please. The capacity building projects need to address demonstrated need or regional problem, support demonstrable increase in wildfire resilience implementation, leverage resources through coordination across jurisdictions, and also show commitment from the applicant for long-term funding plan. So that's a pretty critical one too. Now I know there's a lot on this slide. So the point is to show you the breadth of what can fall under this particular funding category. This is a lot that you could qualify for, ranging from planning to increasing staff or contract capacity to demonstration projects. As I mentioned with the examples for the implementation funding, this is not an exhaustive list. If you have something that's not listed here that you are interested in funding, reach out to us. We can have a further discussion. And again, the thatched area indicates where projects need to be located. And I'll reiterate again, if your project is within the thatched area and it also has an implementation component, you could participate in both funding opportunities. So now I'm going to pass the torch over to Lily to dive a little deeper about, talk about the process for the pre-application and the selection process and some other finer details.
Thanks a lot, Costula, and it's really great to have you all here today. So eligibility, who can apply for our grant programs? Federally recognized tribes, nonprofit organizations, and public agencies are eligible for funding. A nonprofit organization has to meet the 501c3 guidelines. And if you are a community-based organization or a tribe that is not federally recognized, you may apply with a 501c3 fiscal sponsor. If you have any questions about the eligibility, your project, the process, anything like that, please reach out to us and we will do a pre-application consultation. Next slide, please. Ineligible projects. Costula talked a lot about what we're looking for, and I'm going to touch on a few things we're not. Research, just plain and simple, unfortunately, we can't fund that. Projects on private land, also not available for our funding. And for implementation funds, we can't fund mapping or modeling, but we can fund mapping and modeling for capacity building funds. In general, you should think about wildfire resilience grants that need to be focused on the management of open space to reduce fire risk. If you see something or your project doesn't fit within this, we have other grant programs, so reach out to us and we might be able to find a different path forward. Next slide, please. Maintenance. So maintenance is kind of a squishy subject with this, and because we're funding such a broad array of things. So applicants should have a plan for maintenance for projects with a reasonable lifetime. One example would be if you are getting a water tower, you should have maintenance secured and in place, or a plan for that through the lifetime of that water tower. Maybe it's 15, 20 years. Conservancy staff, we can help you assist with determining maintenance requirements for projects. Another example would be having secured maintenance for a chipper for the lifetime of that, or signs that need to last for 10 years or more. One note for vegetation management, we understand that plants do grow back. So understanding if you have maintenance in place for that, that will help you be more competitive, but it is not required. Next slide, please. The proposal and selection process. So hopefully you saw on our website that pre-proposals are due by 5 p.m. on January 14th, 2022. If you missed that deadline, don't be too discouraged because we will accept proposals on a rolling basis after that. Once you submit, within 60 days, we'll respond to the pre-proposals with one of 3 options. A, inviting you to a full proposal, B, requesting clarifications or a resubmission, or C, rejecting the proposal. Applicants, once you submit a full proposal, either after A, within 60 days of that proposal submission, we'll notify you of a decision. And if we approve that full proposal, the Conservancy Board will authorize a grant and will award a final contract. The soonest this could happen is May 2022. Next slide, please. So this is our pre-application. It's a whole 2 pages. And the first page really is who are you and kind of what do you want to call it? So your organization, your contact, how much money you're asking for, really nuts and bolts. When does it start? When does it end? Some lat long, and what does that lead you to? A parking lot, a historic building. And then here on the directions in number 1, we really want to highlight that we want you to check some of these boxes. If you could click once, that'd be great. So please identify which program priorities your project will address. Please check these boxes and then click forward 2, please. In the project description, next slide. You will elaborate on how you check those boxes. So explain the project goals and expected outcomes. Explain how the priorities you checked above will be met by the project. Give us a little bit on your CEQA status, and then include additional attachments as necessary when describing a project. We're not looking for a ton here. A few paragraphs is all. We're not going to hold you to a hard and fast limit either. We're looking for about 3 pages. Next slide, please. So also include the project schedule, include the completion date of major tasks and milestones. I want to note here that all projects must be completed by February of 2025. And then a budget, include what activities you're requesting for and propose sources of additional funding. So make that as clear. One example would be if you're asking for $50,000 from us and you are also asking for $50,000 through another grant, maybe CAL FIRE, and together that would fund your whole project, then you would list both of those and make the status as applied for both. Unless you have secured funding, then you'd label it that. Next slide, please. And the pre-application checklist. It's just 3 things. The pre-application should include a cover sheet, and as I said earlier, be around 3 pages or less to answer the questions I just outlined, a project location map and photos, where it is, and then design plans, images, or mapping files. That's optional. If you have it, that's great. It might help us get a better understanding of your project, but if you don't, that's absolutely fine. Next slide, please. And then if you notice that your project didn't quite fit within what we're looking for, there are a lot of other bits and bobs of grants out there and resources for you to go investigate. CAL FIRE, state parks, Fish and Wildlife, and other conservancies like the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, the San Diego River Conservancy, the LA Rivers and Mountains Conservancies all have a lot of funding for resilient forests and landscapes. Wildfire fuel breaks, CAL FIRE has some funding for that, and the Conservation Corps could probably help with some resources. And then science-based management, CAL FIRE again, and the California Natural Resources Agency also has some funding for thinking about this. This isn't a complete list, and these dollars are in millions. So if it doesn't quite fit here, hopefully it'll fit somewhere. Next slide, please. And that's it. And we are excited to chat with you about your questions. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, you guys. I want to jump in because actually that was a little bit of a misstatement about private land, and I see it's spurred a lot of questions, and we will actually fund projects on private land. But in the priorities that Coastula went over, we are looking for projects that have some kind of public benefit. So certainly private conserved lands like land trust lands are eligible. What we can't really use this funding for is, protecting one private landowner's property from burning. So there needs to be a framing of a public project. But all of those questions about private land, it's okay. We will fund things on private land. And we answered so just to be clear, I think there was one question about, are we going to post these slides? We will send you a follow-up email with the link, but we'll also post this on our website. And then we'll take all the questions and we will post like a FAQ document with all of these questions. We're typing answers to some of them, and then we'll go through these as you type them in. So, and I think everyone can see the ones that we've typed the answers to in the answer thing. So, so then I will go through the ones that I see. What does, I'm kind of jumping over all the private land ones because hopefully I answered that. What does ready for implementation mean? Environmental compliance complete question mark. Does one of you want to take that? You want me to take that?
Well, I would just say it depends on which funding stream we're using. If it's the implementation pot that we have, that we want to see work happen very soon, as soon after we get our grant agreement in place. So that could be early summer, midsummer. For the capacity building grants, those are really intended for a 2 to 3 year process where, yeah, we'd hope to see you get started this summer, but we understand it's going to be a couple of years. So probably, the fall would be fine for something like that. It depends, I think.
Yeah, and then the second part of that is environmental compliance complete. I would say you don't have to have environmental compliance complete to apply for our funding. For our board to award a grant, we will have to make CEQA findings. So CEQA will have to be complete before we can award the grant. Okay, let me see. That was a very fast presentation. How to view the PowerPoint. As I said, we will post the PowerPoint and we'll send you an email to the link. Sorry if we went too quickly.
I want to reiterate too that all of the priorities, all of the examples are in the RFP. So you have them right in front of you. If you pull up the RFP, they're all there.
And also we'll be posting this webinar. So if you want to rewatch it at maybe 1.5 speed or so, that'll be available to you too.
And
That's
we're happy to.
A new trick that I think we've learned during pandemic times. I wanted to answer Sam Hertzberg's question, which is, can permitting and CEQA be included? Yes, it depends. Again, for the implementation projects, when we go to our board of directors, we need to know whether that project's exempt or whether you have a CEQA document. But for the capacity building, for sure, that is intended to build a program where you're going to be doing permitting and CEQA.
We're also very happy to do pre-consultations. So, we still have a month before the pre-application. So reach out to us at wildfire.resiliency@scc.ca.gov and we can schedule something with you.
I have another good one. I like this one from Jack Singer. Will preparation of a CEQA compliant prescribed burn plan be an acceptable task. Absolutely. For both, for either one. We want to see more planned prescribed burns.
Do you want to go to the next one? Can a project be a phase project where phase 1 is design and environmental clearances followed by phase 2 implementation, or does that need to be 2 discrete applications?
Well, I don't think we want 2 applications. I think we want it in 1 application form, but we may, it depends. I would say ideally we'd have 1 grant agreement that would cover both phases. But I think it depends on the circumstances where the property is.
Apply to us as 1 project.
Yeah.
That
we'll sort it out.
We're hanging up on a CEQA. We may have to fund the planning and then go back to our board to fund the implementation.
Yeah.
But describe what you want to do in your pre-application, and then we'll work with you to figure that out.
Oh, this is a good one. Lisa Hulette. Does the project need to have a nexus to a local hazard mitigation plan? I believe those are FEMA related plans. So I think you need I know you need those for federal money, but no, we don't require that.
I see that Liz Chamberlain also asked if capacity building grants need to support specific planned implementation, or they can support building capacity to identify and prioritize future projects. And so I think that they can build capacity to identify and prioritize future projects for capacity building grants only. For implementation grants, they have to be implementing existing projects.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh, Mary, do you want to take a question from Robin Mitchell about can we help pay for creating a master plan? My knee-jerk reaction is no, because those things tend to take so long. I think we would run out of time. Our money's good, depending upon the 2 funding sources, for a couple, 3-4 years. So 2025 is what we're saying right now, although we may be able to get an extension. But those master planning processes seem to take a long time. That's just my reaction. Do you have anything to say on anybody else on that one?
I would think it could be eligible within the capacity building area, but again, the implementation funding, that's the broader jurisdiction. We are trying to actually demonstrate on the ground projects. So while we're open to funding some CEQA or planning for like a burn project, we'd want a pretty assurance that there's going to be actual work done in the relatively near term to reduce the fire risk.
Here's a question where you answer emailed questions, and we don't have them. I don't have them in front of me anyway. And we've tried to get back to just about everybody. We've tried to get back to everybody that's emailed us. So if you haven't gotten an answer, please resend the email and say, hey, why are you ignoring me? And we'll get back.
We are not ignoring you.
There's another answer from Matt Abernathy, or question from Matt Abernathy. If we intend to apply with the partner agencies, would you like a pre-proposal from each agency or just one from the lead agency? And I think just one, please, from the lead agency. There's a space in the application where you can talk about who your partners are and what their roles are.
Yeah. And will one application category on the ground versus activities versus capacity building be favored? No, it's just we have different funding available for these different jurisdictions and these different kinds of activities. We'll see if this worked. Our thinking was to put out one request for projects so that we could help sort through and figure out the best, help as many projects as we can. And so it's not on you to really figure that out. It's just sort of on us to try and see if we have resources that line up with what you're trying to do.
There's a question here
Yeah,
from,
go ahead.
there's a question here from Graham asking if it's intended as an annual funding program. I would say no.
Yeah, we don't know yet what funding we'll have in the future. But you know, we did have funding last year and we have funding this year. So we don't know.
And there's another related question about what the anticipated funding amounts are per project. And I would say that there are no maximum or minimum amounts, but you can't go above what we have total. And Tom and Mary, what were the average amounts last time?
I don't know what the average is. They range between 100,000 and a little over $1 million.
Actually, the smallest one we did last time was like 7,000, but that's a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of the capacity. Sorry.
Yeah. So
no, that's right. For the EA we had.
Yeah. We had a pretty wide range. We don't have a maximum or minimum. We just have the total pots available.
There was a question which I like just because it's convoluted and interesting legally, but would funding forest improvement work on private lands, even though you could show a public benefit at a larger scale? Where do you draw the line on allowing work on private lands, but then stating it's not a public benefit? Is it up to the applicant to state their case? And I would say, yeah, if you want to make the case, it does get us into a lot more nuanced, I guess, situation legally. So we're open. I think we're open to, ideas. And certainly our capacity building grants go to people who are doing work on private land. I want to make sure that's clear. They could be planning for a whole neighborhood of which, a lot of the land is private. But we're making a distinction here between having public money go to a public or nonprofit organization to do planning on, say, a whole watershed versus money going specifically to a specific property owner for an improvement on that private property. That would be a very hard thing for us to do. But certainly we're open to discussing it.
I see a question here from Lindsay Holm, and her question is, with $5 million available for non-Bay counties, I'm assuming for implementation grants, what size implementation project are you looking for? Should projects be in the $50,000 to $450,000 range? And her second follow-up is, what is included in the final application process, and how much time do applicants have to complete the final application?
I'm going to take that second part first. I mean, I realize it's really unsatisfying, but I'm not sure how to answer the first part of the question. We have these pots available. We're going to try and do as much public good as we can with this funding. I think you should just ask again. I guess I am answering the first part first. Ask for what you need, and we will provide what we can in terms of, trying to make good decisions with these grants. We may not award the full amount that you request. In terms of the amount of time that you'll have for the final application, that really depends on when you want to start work. If you want to get work done early this summer, then it's going to be a pretty quick turnaround. If you're not able to start until next fall, then we'll have time then we can be more flexible. What we need the full application is really working back from how much time we would need to review it to make a final decision to then be able to award the grant. So there's not a strict schedule for everyone. It's really a function of trying to get resources to the projects that want to get going as soon as we can. So we can work with you around that. That's a good question.
Oh, I just lost it. There was a question about doing emergency preparedness work in Marin County, and I would say that that would be a possibility under our capacity building grant. Possibly even the other pot. But we just have had some meetings with the newly formed Joint Powers Authority over there, and so we would want to know for sure how it ties in with the work they're starting up. Okay.
I see another question from an anonymous attendee asking if their project is a continuation from a project started from a previous awarded grant. How do we illustrate that on the application? Applying to continue a chipping program. And I would guess that you just put it in your project description. And if you already have an application, you could reference the number, the contract number you have with us, so we can go find it in our system.
Yep. And then the next one on Trex training, for sure, we can fund that. Not a problem. Where are we? Sorry, this thing keeps skipping down, and so I lose,
No, I know.
lose
It's a
where I
little
am. I'm probably skipping over people. Fire access road improvements eligible from Sam. If it's a public road, yes. If it's a privately owned road, probably not. Funding staff members for ongoing, is funding staff? Yes. Oh, see, it just, I don't know where it went. Anonymous person. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Capacity building includes hiring people and paying their salaries.
Elaine's asking if our definition of capacity to build capacity is with the intent to meet our 6 priorities. And I would say yes. Yes, we would like to meet those 6 priorities for the whole program. Great question. Tom, was the question you were looking for from Sam asking, are fire road access improvements eligible? Is that?
Yeah, I think I just answered that, which is if it's private road, it's not. If it's a public road, it could be through the agency that has jurisdiction. The one I found, which goes back to an earlier answer from Ann Baker. Can a fire safe council apply representing multiple private properties but having a clear public benefit? That's what I was talking about earlier. Yes, the answer is yes. Fire safe councils cover private, whole neighborhoods of private property, but it's a public benefit to have a fire safe council doing that work. So for sure.
And then Lauren below and asks if we are focusing on a certain type of activity or location, and she was a few months late. I don't think she was months late because she's here now. I think it was just a few moments and we forgive you. And a little bit of housekeeping. You can watch the presentation again. We'll be sending out both the slides and a link to this recorded webinar. And yes, there are certain types of activities and certain types of locations. I would suggest you review the maps we have in our RFP for implementation and then capacity building.
Good question from Dave. Does the Conservancy assign higher priority to implementation done by California Conservation Corps? No, we do have then private contractors. No, we do have that question in there. And I believe that was something we started because one of our bond acts required it, that we asked that question.
Yes, we would love to see projects that partner with the Conservation Corps.
Yeah.
It's not an obligation, but
yeah. And there
an
are
additional
also
benefit.
There are community conservation corps as well as.
Yeah, the local course as well. And there was I got a follow-up about the Trex training, and to be clear, that's within the capacity building geography. The Trex training would be an eligible thing to apply for. In the implementation geography, with the implementation funds, it wouldn't be eligible. But that's an excellent example of kind of the difference between the two. And Lauren asks what the difference is between this RFP and the one we had last year. Do you want to answer that?
Last year was just the implementation funding, and we only had 2 weeks.
Yeah, we did it very, very quickly. So this we've added in the capacity building
Yeah,
kinds of projects and geography.
we're giving ourselves about a month, right? Considering the
State
holidays.
funds match other state funds. Some state grants prohibit state matching state funds. We aren't requiring matching funds in this, but if it's allowed, you can use our funds to match another grant programs funds. If it's not allowed, it's not allowed.
How many years will grantees have to complete an implementation project? Depending on the kind of fire season we may experience in 2022, some projects like prescribed burning or vegetation work may be delayed due to weather or safety concerns related to fire risk. That's a great question. And we are hoping that projects get implemented by February of 2025. But I also think there might be some reasonable flexibility around that.
There's a question about live transcript, and maybe that's more for Jen. Could people get a live transcript, or it's a part of the recording? I think you can request it. Is that correct, Jen?
Yes, if the transcript is full, I will post that as well. Sometimes there's some tech difficulties with the recorded transcript, but if it's like good to go, I will also post that along with all the other resources.
Thank you.
A question from Dave about would removal of accumulated logging / require maintenance plan? I don't think so. If the project part of the project is to remove the /, then that's a task. And I think earlier when Lily talked about maintenance, it was really about when we make an investment in infrastructure or facilities or equipment, we want to make sure that it isn't just a one-shot deal, that there's some thought going into how you maintain that machinery or whatever is constructed.
There's a question from Paula about whether there's a list of grant applications awarded in the past years that we could reference. There is the easiest place. We had a special board meeting in June, and that had the whole list of all the projects that we awarded. I can see if we can add it somewhere on our resilience page. We also have on our webpage, there's about the Wildfire Resilience Program, and that has profiles of a lot of the projects. But also we can get you the list.
That's, just to be clear, that's a list of our grants?
Of what we awarded last year, yeah.
All right.
And the success rate last year, I'll put that in the frequently asked questions. And actually, when we post the questions, I can post a link to the grants we awarded. There's a solution to that. Scott's asking if we have a history of funding community chipping programs that chip what homeowners have cut themselves. And
Yes.
Is that a CEQA exempt activity? Tom, you want to take that one?
Yes, we have a history, but we've done that in a couple areas. I'd have to look into the CEQA question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's likely to be exempt, and we did with the grants last year, we did fund several community chipping programs.
And Judy's asking if they are working with multiple organizations and fire districts on the North Sonoma coast. Some are ready for implementation, others are in the planning stage. Can we include all in one grant application? And yeah, please do.
Yeah.
This is a good one. Where did it go? What is with this thing? It was something about, can they buy property? Where did it just go?
Oh, I saw that one. Yeah.
Sorry, folks. the questions
We're
are
trying, we're
they're
trying.
scrolling, but then they seem to
Can
scroll.
I have one while you look for that. Can a public agency instead of a 501c3 serve as a fiscal sponsor for a non-federally recognized tribe? If you can, yes. We're just limited in who we can grant to. But if that's something that your agency can do, then we can grant to public agencies.
I see the question from Marina, Tom. Is land acquisition an eligible project type?
Right. Mary, I'm going to punt that to you.
I don't think so. I mean, I guess you would have to convince us how that acquisition is reducing wildfire risk, which is not immediately obvious to me that would work, but you're welcome to try and make the case, but I don't quite understand how it would be reducing risk.
Well, and even if that were the case, that this is California and this is the coast, and land gets quite expensive, and so yeah, it would be that would be another consideration. We could certainly use up all of our funding just to buy 100 acres on the coast somewhere.
So Brett asks, how do we schedule a pre-application consultation?
You email wildfire.resilience at
No.
SEC. You email wildfire.resilience@scc.ca.gov.
That one.
Yes, thank you.
I'll take
And
it.
it's on our website too. And then can wildfire resilience grants fund multiple on the ground project activities? I'd say yes.
Yep.
The more the merrier.
Anonymous asks, could capacity building funding be used to conduct research that analyzes the effects of implementation projects funded by this grant? And yes, for sure, that would be what we can consider a demonstration project. It falls very nicely under that, the intent of that grant program. What we don't want to do is just fund pure research that doesn't, more university level stuff. So that doesn't sound like that's the case anyway. Daniel asked, or Danielle, sorry, I need to get my reading glasses on, interested in a rundo removal. Well, you know, our initial grant program was regional forest and fire, and we just kind of drew the line at calling, we sort of went to the chaparral as kind of the far end of what is considered forest. So something like a rundo, I think, kind of falls out of that definition, but I think we're open on the implementation funding to look at a project, you know, if it's really a fire problem.
Yeah, I would say if it's identified as you know, in a community wildfire plan as a priority, then it would be an eligible implementation activity.
Yeah, and the other thing is we're always trying to bias or give points to projects or put emphasis on the WUI, the wildland urban interface. And I'm not sure the rundo that I've seen, which is mostly in the Salinas River, is not in the WUI. It's down pretty far away from where people live. But let's talk about it, if possible.
Elaine has a question. Would funding cover retrofits and recommendations based on a home hardening assessment within an entire neighborhood and not for a single structure in a high severity area? Would that be eligible?
I don't think so.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we can do home hardening with our enabling legislation. But I think as Lily pointed out, there are other grant programs. And I think there's some that are specifically supporting that kind of important work.
Here's a question from Kai. asking would a local government fire agency application for dedicated fire suppression water storage be considered capacity building or implementation?
I would think that if you're ready to build it, it would be implementation. And if you want money for plans, designs, and permits, then it would be the other one.
Okay, I'll type that in there.
Okay, Lauren Welch asked a question. Last year, the RFP did not require work on SCC cities areas, but this one does. So I think you're talking about areas within city limits. Lily, did you want to answer?
I don't actually understand that question.
Yeah, I'm not.
So
I'm
maybe
not
you
sure
could
either.
restate it.
Yeah, we did fund with the early action funding last year. We did fund abatement projects within city limits. That did happen. So.
And then Steven's asking regarding the capacity grant staff salary payments, what duration would funds be available? Would the funds be distributed over time or in a single repayment? And I think you would invoice us and then we would pay that invoice through the length of our contract.
Right.
So basically as frequently as monthly, but it is on a reimbursement basis.
Right. Brett asked, does a CWPP have to be in place for fuel reduction programs? So for the implementation funding, we need to see some sort of plan. But for capacity building, no. The capacity building grants could go toward preparation and working with groups to produce a prioritization plan of some sort. Oh, next one from Ann Baker. Curious why there's no capacity building funds for our jurisdiction, non-Central Coast. Well, that's because this money was split up out of Sacramento, out of the Department of Conservation, to block grants. And we're one of the block grant managers, and the funding for Southern California went to a couple other organizations. One is the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. Another one is the Resource Conservation District of San Diego. They were in the initial round of funding, and then more recently, and so they're getting more funding and probably will be maybe putting on an RFP similar to this. And then there are new block grant funds going to some more organizations. Off the top of my head, I can't name them all, but I know one is the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. So there is money going down that way.
It's just the funding that we have available, basically. But there are capacity building funds in other parts of the states. We're just not the ones.
Yeah, the intent from Sacramento is to do this statewide.
Lily is asking, great name, Lily, if this funding supports post-fire water quality and infrastructure monitoring. And I'm going to say probably not. We are looking to prevent wildfires and structure and devastation there.
Right.
Okay, Lauren retyped her question. You have SCC coastal community map of areas you will fund projects in that are not coastal communities. Last year's RFP did not require they fall within those coastal communities. I was asking if this RFP did or did not. So if I understand the question, and the map that we have that is like the green of those coastal watersheds that extends pretty far inland, that for implementation funding, your project needs to be within that green area. And then the hatched area is where we have the additional resources for capacity building. So if it's a capacity building kind of project, it needs to be within that area. Hopefully that's clear. Stephen asks if matching funds are required.
No, they're not. They're welcome if you want to go get some more, sure, but they're not required.
And for the capacity building, we would like to see a long-term commitment for funding.
Does a community wildfire prevention plan have to be in place for fuel reduction programs?
Oh, I already got that one.
Oh, you did?
I think so. You can
What did you
answer it.
say?
too.
It's not showing up as answered on my list. What did you tell them?
I said, what did I say? What's the question again? I was looking at this other
If
one.
you have to have a community wildfire prevention
No.
program. No.
But we want it, but if we're going to do implementation funding, we would like it to be pursuant to some sort of plan. If it's a capacity building, we're all about coming up with plans with that program. Elaine asked a question about hiring a consultant to develop a plan for the unhoused and who are living in the dry riverbeds of Ventura County. If it were part of a larger effort, I think we could pay for that. But if that was the sort of the entire project, I think we'd have a hard time. But yes, certainly consider that. Are reporting requirements similar to the last round? Yes. Jamie, that's Jamie, my friend down in Monterey. Hi, Jamie. But I did want to add something, which is that we anticipate that grantees will have to present on some sort of routine basis, maybe once a year, present the results of their work especially on the capacity building. And we're going to try to have more events and more workshops and trainings to fit in with all that. We're really trying to build a program.
And someone's asking what makes a successful vegetation management proposal. And I think the more you review some of the documents we point to or in the fire zone, look at the action plan that came out of the governor in January of 2021, and then look at the boxes for some of the grant stuff we're looking at, the more you can tailor your program or your project to our outline and proposal stuff. We'd really appreciate that. Priorities.
Anonymous asks, what is the long-term component for capacity building? Not sure exactly what the question is there. Capacity means different things to different people. We've kind of broadly defined it as bringing more staff on, bringing technology in, and training folks. So, hopefully that creates long-term benefit. And okay, maybe clarify your question. Graham says, how long is long-term? Well, 2025 is our deadline for this funding right now. We hope to get more.
Robin has asked us to put the action plan from the governor from January 2021 in the chat. We can definitely do that.
I just did it.
Okay, I was just looking it up.
That's the 2021 action plan, right?
The resilience action plan.
And there are many, there's many plans out there. Okay. Can we apply to staff for another funded project?
Are you reading Jeremy's question?
Yeah, I'm not quite getting what Jeremy's after there.
Sounds like
If you already have a grant from us, you can apply again. Maybe that's what the question is.
I would think, yeah, it sounds like it would be something you could apply for if it's helping to get that implementation done. We could pay for staffing as part of that. Anne is asking, where should we look for capacity building grants for projects in the Sonoma area? And that's the North Coast Regional Partnership. And I'll look up that website. Post it.
So the last question I see is, oh, nope, a couple more just popped in. Can funding be used to cover costs associated with existing staff members that are actively carrying out fuel management work?
Yes, funding can be used for that. And for vegetation management proposal needs a commitment of future funding after the, does a vegetation management proposal need a commitment of future funding after the grant is complete? No.
No, I mean, this is something we're kind of candidly, we're still sort of struggling with. We usually require maintenance of improvements that we fund, but we understand that vegetation grows back. So it may be unrealistic to require that if you're doing some kind of vegetation clearance, that is maintained forever. But we would want to understand what your plan is for maintenance. We don't want to fund things that are going to immediately revert to the state they were in. So we'll work with you on what that requirement is, and anything you can do to provide us with explanation in your pre-application would be helpful.
Oh, Sharon Main. Hi, Sharon. That's a good question. Do you think the post-fire law, should I be pushing this button since answer live?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I push it for you sometimes, Tom.
Sorry.
We're learning Zoom, people.
Okay, we got to do it all over. Do you think the post-fire long-term recovery planning effort that addresses fire-safe landscape would and serve as a regional model fit in the capacity? Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you push done.
Oh,
What does that do?
It reorders the questions, then you can't find them.
Because I thought the whole thing's being recorded. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm old. I don't understand. All right, I think we got them all. Did we miss a few? Probably.
there's two one's a comment, one's a question. One from Lisa is the project useful life for vegetation management is typically 4 years. What is the maintenance requirement for VM? I think we kind of answered that though.
We don't have a strict maintenance requirement, but I think if we think it's going to revert immediately, we may have trouble figuring out how we can actually fund it.
It looks like Sharna doesn't see the governor's 2020 plan. Could you repost?
Yeah, I was going to just do that, but now I can't see where I reposted.
We will definitely put it in the FAQs too, and it's in the RFP.
Great.
So you will find it all over the place, but maybe not in our where we're struggling with this Q&A.
We're doing the best we can. Sorry.
We could also just post it on the Conservancy's page where our grant is listed. So it's easy to find there.
We will.
Yeah, it's actually under fire.ca.gov media, somewhere there. I think it is kind of hard to find with Google, but when you do find it, you bookmark it.
Okay.
And Gwen says thank you, and I say thank you all for coming and asking great questions.
Yes.
We'll get better at this, we promise.
And thank you, Robin, for posting as well. The plan we were just talking about.
Great.
Great.
All right.
All right, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Happy
Thank
holidays,
you.
everybody. See you next year.
Bye.